And now for some introductions. So excited to welcome Nedra Tawwab, who is the author of the book you are, first, she's the author of the New York Times bestsellers, Set Boundaries, Find Peace, and the Set Boundaries Workbook. I'm now happy to announce that the book that you are holding in your hot hands, Drama-Free, has now landed on the New York Times bestseller list, its first week of publication. Woo! We love when that happens. All our favorite people need bestsellers. A licensed therapist and sought-after relationship expert, she has practiced relationship therapy for more than 15 years and still stands to tell the story. Nedra runs a popular Instagram account where she shares practices, tools, and reflections for mental health, and she also hosts weekly Q&As about boundaries and relationships. Her conversation partner is someone that we have admired for a long time, Chicago. I promise you she will be on this stage in the future. Luvvie Ajayi Jones is a 3-time New York Times bestselling author, speaker, and multimedia entrepreneur who thrives at the intersection of business, leadership, and culture, and that is true. Her critically acclaimed books, Professional Troublemaker, I'm Judging You. I was actually very nervous to meet Luvvie because I'm thinking, she's gonna judge me. She's nice enough, she hasn't told me her judgments. She's probably gonna text them later. They were instant bestsellers, and they established her as a literary force with a powerful pen. Her first book for young adults, Rising Troublemaker, came out in 2022, and it debuted at number 3 on the New York Times bestseller list. And now, and I don't know, do you have it in your hand? I hope you brought it in your hand, maybe. Her newest venture is a picture book coming out May 2nd called Little Troublemaker Makes a Mess. It is so darling, you're gonna love it. Now, let's give a huge welcome to Nedra and Luvvie. Come on out.
Oh, how y'all doing? Excited to be here, Nedra. You just dropping hits. So we are here to talk about Drama-Free, her latest New York Times bestselling book, which I have to say, y'all, like, her doing this in the hardest category, by the way. The category that we are in, and that this book is in, is the hardest one to get on, and you've done it over and over again.
Do another over for the next book.
Hey, over and over and over again.
Okay.
We're gonna keep it going, okay? We're gonna keep it going. So how does that make you feel?
It's amazing. Like, you know, as I'm writing the books, I'm not thinking like, this will be it. I'm sort of thinking that. But you never know if it'll happen.
Yeah.
So it's nice to be able to talk about family drama. And people want to read about that and gather in a room to talk about family drama. That's pretty remarkable.
I mean, you know we love mess, okay?
This is true.
First and foremost. But, okay, so this book, Drama-Free, which y'all gonna get to read and listen to on Audible and all that good stuff. What made this be the book that you wanted to write after Set Boundaries?
I noticed a lot in the comments, so many people saying, but what about if it's my mom? It's my sister. And I'm like, they get boundaries too.
Amen.
But we don't get that because we have a separate system in our brains for family. We don't recognize that relationships should be healthy. Not just friendships, not just work relationships, but also family relationships. And there shouldn't be a different set of standards for abuse or neglect or manipulation. But how do we start to understand that what we experienced was not okay, and it's possible to change our perspective about that not being okay?
Because the thing about boundaries that you wrote about that was really piercing was the fact that some people did not realize that this was actually a right that they had. So now that you put it to the family structure, what is the hardest thing that you think people contend with when it comes to family and those types of relationships, like the gaslighting that happens, the dysfunction?
I think the hardest thing is acknowledging that a person is not changing. When we look at the history of the relationship and the person continuously gaslighting, it's not one occasion, it's not two, there is a pattern of certain things. And when you really look at that, it's like, oh wow, like this is who they are. Like this is how they try to have their way in relationships. This is how they communicate. This is how they're unable to handle their emotions sometimes. Like this is who they are. That's really hard for us to accept because we're hoping they're gonna change. It's a parent, it's a sibling, it should be this way. And that makes it really hard for us to accept the person as they are.
So, I don't know if you guys have been following Nedra on social media for a long time like I have, but Nedra makes it her goal to drag us by our eyebrows every day with these gems that she be dropping. I'd be like, Nedra, did you have to come for my chest today? So, you being this person, I mean, like, you will cut through the heart of the matter in 90 seconds. And you are so put together, and you are just somebody who people probably have these different assumptions about. So even in the beginning of the book, you talked about one of the biggest assumptions that people have about you. What is that?
That I don't have any family trauma. I remember in high school, I wanted to see the school social worker. And she was like, no, like you're not on my caseload, you don't have behavior issues, you don't have issues with your grades. And I'm like, but I have problems. But problems look a certain way. They want you to have like these negative outcomes. And I'm like, well, I don't have no, what do I have to do? Do I have to bust a window?
Yeah, yes.
I'm having problems. Kick a desk over?
Right.
You know, it was like we can respond once there's an issue. And I'm like, all right, I guess I'll start reading these Iyanla Vanzant books. But yeah, I'm like, I have issues in my relationships with family members, but I didn't present as that. So there is this expectation that problem people, I don't know, maybe they're disheveled and they have all these, you know, life events. But when you have things going on and you're maybe going to college and you have healthy relationships, people don't necessarily think that.
So you've always been this girl?
Sort of, becoming. You know, I think I was the person in my family, I would notice certain things and I would question it. I would be like, why are they coming back over here after they did X, Y, and Z? And I was told, well, that's my brother, that's my sister. I'm like, but that ain't my uncle.
Okay, you don't get to claim it.
That's your brother.
Okay. Hey man, I'm good for that. I'd be like, don't know that man. So you've had this put together thing, and as a result, people have never thought about you as somebody who was in trauma.
Yeah.
How did you even become a therapist? Like, what made you become a therapist?
You know, I always say I think I became a therapist when I had my first client. Before then, I thought I wanted to do all this other stuff. I was still discovering what I wanted to do. I had my very first client at an internship in grad school, and that was the moment where I was like, this is it. Like, I could stop all this other stuff. I was searching, like, I don't know what career I want, but I'm like, oh, this is it. Like, I really like the feeling of helping a person have aha moments, helping them see the patterns, helping them connect to resources, being that support person. My first internship as a therapist was in a runaway shelter for teenage kids in Detroit. And these kids had a lot of family issues, you know, that people don't typically run away when, you know, everything is okay. So they're running away from abuse. They're running away from neglect. They're running away because, you know, maybe they have some mental health issues or their parents have mental health issues. So that's where my family work started. You know, I think about those kids that I work with then where they didn't really have adults to listen to them and to just be able to talk about their stories because, you know, adults can be really dismissive. We're very much like, you don't have no problems, you ain't got bills. Well, my boyfriend broke up with me, that's a huge problem. You know, it's like you have really big issues, but as a child or as a teenager, unfortunately, a lot of that is minimized because as we get older, we start to think, well, this problem is bigger than that problem. When in actuality, all problems are big to the person experiencing them. At any age. If I cut my thumb, this is my biggest problem. Please do not compare your flat tire to my thumb. We both have problems.
The thing I love about this book is the fact that, like, I think most people can relate to family drama. Who here will admit to having a dysfunctional family? Chat, all of us, okay? You know when dysfunction happens? Especially when it all comes out, weddings, funerals. Shall I tell you, my wedding caused all sorts of drama. I told my mom, I was like, I'm not inviting my aunt. That's your sister. I put one of you. That's your sister. She got to come.
Can't come.
Your sister can't come. That's your aunt. What that got to do with me and the price of tea in China? So for you, you know, you started the book with talking about dysfunction and recognizing it. About how we don't often recognize that we're actually in dysfunction because it's normalized. What is one of the biggest things that you can offer up around that?
You know, I think sometimes TV, you know, I think sometimes reading, looking at other families and thinking about what are those differences? This person does this. Is this what happens in my family? Because we don't always have a reference point. I grew up, you know, in the 90s on the east side of Detroit. It was an urban area, so lots of parents were, you know, maybe on drugs or people had broken homes. And, you know, I remember going to school and they would have like enrichment programs, and that's where you learn like, oh, that's how that's supposed to happen, or that's how that is. I mean, there's so many spaces. It could be school, it could be from, you know, the lady down the street, it could be anywhere, but there are these opportunities for us to see these positive differences and notice that this doesn't make me feel okay. This is something that I'm experiencing that's maybe not abnormal, because I think it is your norm. It's just not okay. But in dysfunctional families, they will try to make the bad things seem like you should tolerate them. Like, oh, it's just this, you know, they just talk to people like that. You know she mean. You know, it's a lot of excuse making for bad behavior.
How do you function and deal as a person who's like, I'm not with it, right? When the dysfunction is normalized and you're the person who's asking the questions of, why are they coming over if they just stole the TV last week? How does a lone wolf cope? Okay, y'all see me with my Oprah one. Okay, I'm just saying.
Well, I think one way to cope is not to try to convince other people. We typically want everybody to think like us. We want them on our side. Didn't you see them do this? Don't you think? And it's like, it doesn't matter what they think. What happened, happened. They are not in the same place as you, and understanding and readiness to change and do anything about it. You can have your response, and your response might be, I don't want that person to come to my house and throw my TV.
Okay.
I may not want to talk to that person. I can't control your relationship with them, but I can certainly control my relationships. Often we have to look outside of our families for support. You know, you can't go to people who are not on the same page to try to get that support. So it becomes a need to talk to chosen family. Find your people. It's friends, it's coworkers, it's mentors, it's people in the community who may be willing to support you, who may have, you know, similar things happening in their family. So don't just say, oh, it can only be family. But I do think in dysfunctional families, there is a lot of brainwashing around, we are the only people who can help you. Blood is thicker than water. You shouldn't trust strangers. I remember when I was in high school and I got my first car, my mom would say to me, don't let your friends drive your car and use it. I'm like, I don't have no friends who would use me. I do have some family members.
Okay.
But my friends, I'm like, I picked them, they good people.
Exactly. That's chosen right there, okay? No, that's actually a great point right there. Like the fact that they'll tell people to look out for others, not seeing the reflection.
Yeah, I'm like, you didn't tell me to look out for your sister.
Okay. So I think one of the things about, you know, human beings in general is we just love belonging. So for the person who's afraid of being the lone wolf, who's not yet the lone wolf, but it's like, yo, it just has not been sitting in my spirit. How do you venture out to be the one that is now saying like, I know everybody else is gonna be mad at me if you're saying this or doing this, but I'm gonna go anyway?
Find community, talk to more people. You are not alone. Sometimes we think we're alone because we haven't shared our stories with others. There's so many opportunities for us to just share a little bit and see who else is experiencing that thing. When we look at statistics of mental health, substance abuse, people from, single parent families, it's like half the people in this room, or, like 1 in 3 for some of this stuff. So it's not like, oh, I'm the only one. Well, you feel like you're the only one when you haven't been vulnerable, when you haven't shared who you are with other people. It feels like, you're on an island.
And that's real. And I think shame dies when secrets die too, right?
Yes.
And one of the things that's weaponized often in dysfunctional families is secrets. Like, we're thinking, don't tell nobody my business. Meanwhile, that's actually your story, right? So what is the difference between the secrecy and privacy? You broke it down in the book too, that's really good, but.
Well, privacy is what you choose to share with others, and you've acknowledged it, and you're willing to be open about it with yourself. It is not a space of shame. It is a space of keeping things close. Secrecy is a shameful place to be, because it's something you haven't opened up about, maybe something you're not honest about, and certainly something that you're ashamed of.
Who here has always struggled with that idea of secrecy and privacy? Okay, some. And I think some of that is even cultural. So you even talk about how family is a cultural system. Culture determines many things about our lives, down to how we dress, what we laugh at, how we even express ourselves, and how we show up. So family being a culture, think about the fact that your family is a culture. Culture is so embedded and deeply in everything that we do. It dictates everything. So when family's in dysfunction, how does that show up as culture?
Well, I see that a lot when people marry into a family, another culture. And you start to notice like, oh, wait, like the women in your family do this, or, on holidays y'all do that, or whatever those things are. You start to notice like, oh, this is different. And it's like everybody, they just have this way of doing things. It is problematic when someone wants to shift sometimes. When a person says, well, every year on whatever holiday, I want to start doing this other thing. Or instead of you coming over, whenever you want to, I want you to start calling me. But I've heard people say in my family, you just come over whenever you want to.
Please don't.
Yeah. But that's a part of their culture, like this, having, an open door. You'll hear people say about their grandmothers, she would feed everybody in the neighborhood. Like all of this sort of stuff is like the culture in that family to just embrace strangers and, all of these different things. And then some, families aren't like that. So there is this way of being. So it's important for us to figure out, like, what are the key elements in my family? What are the things that we do that might be different, or things that are important to us? And how does our culture bump up against other people's culture? Like when you start to get married or you have friends, like how does that sort of become problematic? Because it can.
I mean, culture is also hard to break, just in general.
Yeah.
Right? Like your culture also is your food. So the idea that people now have to break the dysfunction to move on to healing can feel like an obstacle, like a giant thing. And one of the points that you made in the book was about how like culture doesn't have to stay the same, how somebody can change, but that change is not necessarily about severing ties. So what is the middle ground between enabling and receiving whatever this gaslighting dysfunction is and cutting everybody off?
The difference is acceptance and being willing to do the changing on your part. With enabling, we are tolerating behaviors, we're supporting the behaviors. We may gossip about it, we may talk about it to 8 people, but we're not doing anything different. And then with the codependency, it's like we're trying to help people with their problems. They haven't requested any help. But sometimes people will have
That's the one.
codependent relationships to protect the family, to protect the image, to protect a legacy.
Let's dig deeper into that, because you talked about the difference between codependence and enmeshment, right? And you used the example of twins, who one decided to get married and the other twin was feeling left out. So now that when you talked about that story, I said, ooh, drag us. Okay. Dig deeper into this whole codependence and enmeshment thing, because I think it's a huge thing that so many of us deal with that we don't actually understand is a real problem. I was like, legit, I might have some codependence issues. I think I'm Captain Save the World.
Yeah. Yeah, with codependency, I think we think of it as like, I'm just helping people, and I often ask, did they ask you?
Ooh. Come on.
And here's a really big thing with codependency. Are they being helped? Because sometimes we're just doing the same thing over and over and the person isn't improving. Help is like there is some improvement. When you think about like learning to read, there is A, B, C, then you're sounding out the word, then you know the word. That's help. So if you're still like in the beginning phase, your help has not been beneficial to that person. So I wouldn't consider it help as much as I would say you are doing their stuff.
You define codependence as give the definition of codependence, because I feel like people need to just hear this, because it's going to touch somebody's spirit. You're going to feel convicted.
Codependence is entangling your emotion and your needs with someone else's. And we make it seem as if it is for them, but it's really for us. When people are in a codependent relationship with someone, they are getting something out of it too. Some people love to be needed. They don't know what to do if they can't help somebody or rescue them. They don't know what to do if they can't loan this person money. I'm so shocked by people who complain about stuff and then they do it. I just saw a reel on this. And it's just hilarious where this mother is like, why you just give me the paper? Give it here so I can sign it. Some of us will complain about, oh my gosh, they keep calling me for help. But the moment that person stops calling, they're going to call them, do you need my help? It's something that you're getting from this. And I think a lot of times people don't recognize that. It's always, they see maybe they're feeling a need that you don't recognize.
One of the questions that my therapist asked me once was, not once, she's probably asked me a couple of times, was, who are you when you have nothing to offer? Who are you when you have nothing to offer, when you have nothing to give, when you literally just have to show up as yourself without any additional thing to prove your value? And I think a lot of codependence depends on the fact that we derive our value from how we help people, who we are when we're showing up and being Captain Save Planet. And that, honestly, is kind of at the heart of the matter of like that idea of enmeshment too, around codependence, and how much, especially women probably struggle with this more than anybody else because of the fact that we're built to be nurturers, right? The world looks at us as like we need to be the ones to show up for everybody. We need to know how to do it all. So the whole superwoman cape thing, a lot of that is codependence, isn't it?
Well, I think everybody in this room has the opportunity to fight that gender role of you should be the person to do this. Women aren't stronger than men. I don't even believe they're more emotional. I think that there is some rearing that teaches you this is acceptable for you and this is acceptable for him. When people are people, humans are humans, and we all feel stuff, we all think stuff, and for some reason, even in families, I've heard men shamed by their, I was at a funeral once, and a little boy was crying, and men were walking by, boy, toughen up. I'm like, he's at a funeral.
Guys, if he can't cry when somebody dies, when can he cry?
Never.
Never, apparently. My God.
Never.
Wow.
Yeah.
I think a lot of it is just also embedded in our culture in general.
Yeah.
Like, we've always been looked at as the helpers. Now the question becomes, so for people who are codependent, who have trouble receiving help, so they're scalping themselves, how should they start approaching their relationship with giving, taking?
One assignment that I give to my clients often, and they hate this, is when you go to the grocery store and they say, "Do you want any help?" Just say yes. You don't need to have a brace on your leg. You don't have to have 102 bags. One bag. They are asking you, do you want help? Their whole job is to take the groceries to the car. Let them help you.
Let them help you.
You don't have to say no and struggle to the car because you got it. There are people all the time. How can I help you? I don't need nothing. Meanwhile, you look like you are disheveled. You need help.
You look downtrodden.
You
Okay.
need a lot of help. Yeah. So I think it's a matter of seeing when it's offered and just allowing it to occur. And sometimes, like I said, you have to manufacture it. You might have to create something, invite some people. I'm just gonna practice being helped. I'm gonna ask a friend to come over here and help me clean out my closet. And I'm not gonna do it all. Maybe I'll just sit back a little bit and, give her some direction and watch her do it. You have to practice accepting help because maybe, people are tired of asking you and hearing no. They may assume you don't need any help.
Because you don't.
Yeah.
How many people here struggle with that? How many people struggle? Oh, everybody, chat. So I call it an ask wound. I call it an ask wound. And I think it took me getting married to start healing my ask wound. Because I'd be up there I'd be over here while ordering groceries, and he's like, "You need help?" "No, I'm good." Meanwhile, he's looking at me like, "Ma'am, you're struggling," right? And it took a minute for me to understand. I didn't even know how to receive the help. But understand it is a practice. It isn't. I love the fact that you're like, go to the grocery store and just say yes.
Yeah, just say yes. When that friend asks you, "You need any help?" Yes. Let me think of something. When someone asks me, "Do you need any help?" I'll come up with the smallest little thing. "Can you grab the broom?" I don't even need a broom, but you asked. I just want you to do something. Can you sweep for me? I don't need to, So I think sometimes we just have to get into the practice of giving the other person that job. I do think we're capable, but we go so much further just by having that help and that support. And I think it's really difficult when you grow up maybe emotionally neglected, or you grow up as a child who is parentified, and you're told to, get your little brother from school, or fix your dinner, or do all these things. Like, you really didn't have help. But we have to recognize in our adulthood that those things that we used to do that were useful, those skills were useful. That's what helped you get through childhood. You may not need those anymore. This is a new time, and little Tommy needed that. But you're grown now, you've picked people who can help you, they're trying to help. You need to learn how to accept it and ask.
Yes. What you needed when you were in survival mode is different from what you need when you are going to be thriving. Right? And I think people are so stuck in the survival mode because they've had to, because of how they grow up and whatever reason. Who here is the first child, the oldest? I am so sorry. On behalf of the babies, I am so sorry. So I know a lot of people in that way even struggle with how their childhood shows up now. One of the points that you made in the book is one of the ones you just said, which is about how we can change our narrative at any point. Who you were and what you went through does not have to continue to be who you are now.
Yes.
How do you start shedding that old survival mode version of yourself?
Ask yourself why. We do so many things and we don't even know why. We are just trapped in patterns of behavior. That when you notice like an energetic shift when a certain person calls your phone, but you answer every time, it's like, why? When you have the conversation and it goes in a direction that you don't like, ask yourself why. Why are you still talking to this person in this routine way? Why are you accepting this behavior in this very routine way? We get into patterns in our relationships with people, and we think it's like, oh, they need to stop this. Well, they're in the pattern too. Somebody has to recognize this does not work. You are noticing, so how do you start to pull them away from the things that routinely happen? I've certainly had, whether it's friends or family, where you notice, oh my gosh, this person, they're so negative. When I notice that, I typically, try to shift the relationship. Let me bring up a different topic. Maybe if I change the subject, maybe you don't have to stay in the problem. There are different ways to approach it, and it's not saying to the person, you need to be more positive.
Oh, toxic positivity is real.
Yeah, you don't have to say you need to be more positive, but I kid you not, I had a client one time, and anytime you say, how are you doing? Oh, you about to hear it. And so after about 3 times of seeing her, I started with the topic. I stopped asking her, how are you doing? I didn't want to hear it. I did not want to know. I'm like, so according to your file.
Okay.
Yeah, so this is what we're going to talk about today, because the how you're doing, it's not going to be anything therapeutic. It's going to be about a foot and I'm like, I don't know how this foot connect to why you in therapy. So we really have to look at the patterns we're in with people and start to say, like, maybe it's me. I am giving them space to talk about this stuff. I'm not doing anything different.
That's hard.
It is hard.
Because ultimately, you're telling everybody they got to change themselves.
I know.
Okay, clutching pearls, what? So, for one of the things so you talked about this adverse
childhood experiences.
Talk about that survey, and where do we get it?
Google it, adverse childhood experiences. It's a test, it's 10 questions, and it's, have you witnessed domestic violence? Have you experienced physical abuse? Single parent in a home? Did you have a parent incarcerated? My score is 7 out of 10, and I think it's an 8 out of 10. Here's the thing though, you can have life impacts with as little as a 2. Because we're not all impacted in the same way. And sometimes people have been emailing me, well, my score is a 9. I'm like, you can have an impact as little as a 2. And really I would say a 1, because I don't know how that, affected you. So it's very hard for me to say that these 5 things are bigger than this 1 thing.
Yeah.
Because it's really based on our personality, other experiences we've had in the world, our opportunities, our mental health, and so many other things. So it's an indicator of things that have happened, but it's certainly not an indicator of how your life can be.
And I think it's an important quiz for people to take, because a lot of people don't even realize they've actually been through trauma.
Yeah.
Right? You think that's just what life is. You don't have the language to call it trauma. I'll tell you that. Like, when I started therapy, I thought I was going to therapy because other people weren't going to therapy around me. I was like, they got problems. Okay, how do I deal with them? And I find out, I'm like, oh, I would have not called that trauma. I just thought that just happened. So even being able to put and quantify your experiences to validate them, because I think one of the things that also happens is we invalidate our own experiences, which is what allows us to also live in dysfunction.
Yeah.
Because you've convinced yourself multiple times, that's okay.
Or it's not that bad.
Or it's not that bad. Oh, it ain't that bad. They didn't just say that. It wasn't that terrible. So I actually do think there's something worthwhile in you being able to quantify, no, you've been through it.
Yeah.
You've been through it.
You've been through it. And sometimes it's really helpful for us to understand that other people have been through it too.
That part.
And to have that compassion for them. Now, not tolerance for them, but compassion. Because those are 2 different things. Sometimes we think, oh, I'm being compassionate, I keep accepting their stuff. No, that ain't compassion. Compassion is saying, whoa, they've experienced a lot too. I can see why. Wow, that was really hard for them. It's still not okay for them to treat you a certain way.
I mean, you can have compassion from a distance. Okay? You ain't got to be up close for compassion. I think that's part of what people also struggle with. That whole blood is thicker than water thing. Blood ain't thicker than my peace of mind.
Yeah.
Like, that just, people gotta understand that.
Yeah.
So, when you're trying to change yourself, you notice your whole family is just, when your eyes are open, when you can't unsee, right? When you start going to therapy or you take the test and realize, no, there's a lot of dysfunction or I've gone through a lot of trauma, it's hard to begin with. Because it's almost like the Matrix, red pill, blue pill. How does somebody like move forward with this new truth that is thrown in their face?
Very slowly. You know, you don't have to do it all in a week or a month. Sometimes like some people like prescriptive healing. You know, how long will this take? It's like, well, it happened to you for 18 years. So I don't know, 18 sessions? I don't know how we quantify that,
Right.
You know? Because what happens with us sometimes, we discover things at different points. So we may get to a place of, working on something and we feel better about it, but then this other thing comes up or this new thing comes up. Some dysfunction isn't from childhood, it's from adulthood. It can start when, a parent dies and y'all have to go through their stuff and, you're fighting with your siblings, or there's a certain expectation that this sibling help with the elderly care, or this aunt starts doing this, or this person, there's so many things that happen in adulthood that are still pretty traumatic and devastating to families. So, some of it starts when we're younger, but lots of it continues. One thing that I think about a lot is, folks who have relationships with their parents and they're not any different than what they experienced in childhood. It's still the same, maybe substance abusing parent or neglectful parent. I've talked to people who are still being hit by their parents and they're in their 20s.
How? I'm sorry. I'm sorry, but if we're the same size, we're not.
Intimidation.
True.
Intimidation and manipulation, and you're afraid of the person. Yeah, this stuff still happens. So it's not all childhood stuff. Some of it is continuing.
So that whole inner child thing of us, like we're all basically taller versions of who we were as little kids, carrying the same fears, the same need for approval. So like, as you're trying to heal your inner child, and let's say you're being re-traumatized, how do you move forward? If you're like, you know what, every time I heal, you try me again, right? Like, how do you encourage clients who are like, I feel like I don't ever really go 3 steps forward before I'm pulled back 4 times?
I don't think you went any steps forward if you're still being triggered in that same way. I would challenge that and say, maybe something really hasn't changed. Maybe you've talked about it. Maybe you think the healing is talking about it, but it's also responding to it differently. Maybe shifting the relationship. It's not just like, I acknowledge that this person was this. Well, there may not be any more room left for them to be that thing in your life.
How do you help your clients through like their inner child situation? Because I feel like a lot of us either are trying to protect the kid version of us, we're trying to be the adults we needed. What is something that is really helpful for people around that?
I usually don't use the word inner child.
What do you use?
Little Luvvie.
Oh, yay.
Little Luvvie. Yeah, so I don't say inner child. I usually say, what would little Luvvie think about that? Her dad calling her, and I'll give it a little animation and calling her and saying, and you can get people to like get into the spirit of thinking about little Luvvie, and they like, that would have made her so happy. I'm like, yeah, so you missed him calling you, huh? Now I'm doing therapy. Okay, I'm using my therapy voice.
You using your therapy voice? Oh, I'm soothed. My girl Debbie was on my podcast, and we actually had the conversation about the inner child, and the inner version of herself. She said she put a picture of her when she was 4. A picture that she actually typically hates because she was like, her hair was disheveled. She just looked like run down. And she says she put this picture on her bathroom mirror. And she says every day she walks by this picture and she tells her, you're safe now. And that was a way that she's telling little Debbie, like, all these different traumas that you've been through, like, now you're okay. What is something that people can do similarly to kind of heal themselves or talk greatly to themselves in those moments, especially if they're gonna start talking about healing family dynamics? You're gonna be afraid of what happens to that little girl if she can't call her favorite little brother or her mom or her dad.
I think that's a great one. I also think telling a story about the person in the picture is a great one. You know, at this time in your life, what was happening? You know, what things you wish would have happened? Sometimes we have to go back and feel the stuff we couldn't feel then. So to talk about those experiences and to say, when that happened, I felt. When you're in survival mode, you don't have the opportunity to feel. It's like your house is on fire. You're like running through the house, you're getting the stuff you outside. It's not like I was scared, and then when the fire came in the room, none of that happened. And sometimes we have to revisit those stories to bring ourselves out of it. When that fire started, I remember like being in my bed and being like shocked that somebody grabbed me, and you know, like going back through those times and telling the story in a feeling focused way can be very helpful.
I love that. I love that. By the way, questions gonna start soon. Start thinking about your questions so we can make sure we get as many as possible in. And questions, not just comments. Okay. For you, you're a cycle breaker. You are a cycle breaker. You've interrupted generational trauma. You've interrupted generational trauma is really what we call a generational curse.
Yes, we do.
Honest.
Yes.
Like, it is just really generational trauma. So for the cycle breakers, which it's really hard being a cycle breaker because you're looking around you and you're basically charting a new course. Let's say you haven't seen the healthy framework. Let's say you haven't seen the healthy family structure. How do you then create the thing you haven't seen?
Books, mentors, trusting your instinct and intuition. There are so many things that we feel intuitively that we don't do because we think other people will say something about it or they will disagree with it, but we already know. And so it's really about trusting yourself and not looking for that validation from other people, especially the people who are still in the cycle. I had a cousin recently who stopped talking to her mother, my mother's sister. And she was telling me about it, and I said, I'm so proud of you, because I know this was so hard. You really struggled for many years, you know, in that relationship, and I've seen how it's impacted you. I'm really proud of you. And she was like, you're the only person who said that. I said, well, I'm a therapist, so that's one. And two, you know, I've seen the relationship. And I'm gonna be honest, it's hard to watch. Now, no one will be honest and tell you that because that's your mama. but I'm gonna tell you, I have seen it have a horrific impact on your life. So her hearing that, I think that felt good for her. Because you validated this thing while everybody else is telling her you have to talk to her. What you got her birthday coming? And I said, well, you know, the impact of the relationship is really important. You have to, you know, you have to think about that. Everybody won't make that choice, but it's a choice that you decided to make. So if you are the person breaking the cycle, sometimes going within that system and saying, why won't y'all support me? You know, it will backfire. Because they are still in the space that they want to be in, and you're trying to get out. You need to maybe find some new people. You need to find those family members who don't come to the stuff. Maybe they've been away for a reason. So there is support. You just have to find it perhaps outside of your family. I think one of the most powerful things about this book
is that some people will see themselves as the ones who are creating dysfunction.
You think so? You think they have that level of self-awareness?
So I actually am of the ilk of, there are some people who create dysfunction on purpose. Like I have somebody in my family who I swear is the Sula character from the Toni Morrison book. She knows she's chaotic. She knows she's chaotic. And that's why I want to invite her to my wedding. But I do actually, now, the thing is though, will they pick this book up? I'm not sure. But I think there's some dysfunction that's willful. Not all of it is unknown dysfunction. And I think that's where we actually also have to be honest with ourselves. There's the one that you're like, oh man, she just mean, she don't know she mean, she knows she's mean. She knows she's correct, she knows she's mean, right? There's
She's trying to be.
She's trying to be. There's some of this that's willful, and then some of this that's just like, this person's completely lacking self-awareness. And that's also kind of why I believe in the truth of telling people who they are. Because you can't say you didn't know once I've told you.
But you know what? Now, that's true. But I will say, I was talking to someone, and they were saying how the person was like, why won't you talk to me? And they told them, they like, that's not the reason. It's like, so if I tell you, that's still not good enough because you're trying to figure out if my reason is big enough for you.
For you, correct.
So I have to be chaotic enough for you. Correct. So your level of chaos shouldn't be enough. So it's interesting, even when we tell people about themselves, they still may feel, okay, that's still not a big enough reason. Like there has to be something else. I do think, you know, letting people know can be helpful. And then there are some people who,
God bless.
yeah.
You're like, bless your heart, let's just not speak again.
Yeah.
Look, understood. And I also think, you know, there's a healthy dose of, there's a lack of, I don't know what word I'm looking for here, but like the people who will gaslight you.
Oh, yeah.
Who you will even tell what they've done and they'll be like, I don't know what you're talking about.
Yeah.
And I also think to your point, this is also why the change that needs to happen is within us, and the actions that we choose have to be outside of other people, because you can't choose your action just based on the reaction you're gonna get or what you think you're gonna get.
Yeah, I love what you said about your family member and not inviting them to your wedding, because sometimes, well, most times in families, when you decide to not have a relationship with the person that everybody is still in relationship with, they will try to bring you to that other side, try to get you to invite the person, tell you how sad this person is, that you don't want to talk to them, all of these things. And we have to create, you know, some boundaries there and say, hey, I don't want to hear about Anita.
Nope.
I understand that you want to have a relationship with her, but I don't have an aunt named Anita, by the way. But
we're going to use Anita.
We're going to use Anita. But, you know, I understand that you have this relationship, but it's not a relationship I choose to have. Or I understand that you may not agree with my decision, but I want you to respect it and maybe not bring that up anymore. So we have to say to those people, I understand we're not in the same place with this. However, you need to respect my decision to not have a relationship with certain people, or to maybe not exclude or include them in things sometimes, or whatever that is.
That's good language to have that a lot of people just don't have, right? Because the how of even saying these things are really tough for folks. So being able to have that exact language, which is what I love that you provide. Like you'd be like, no, this is a script. Say this to them, you're like, word, okay, when I go in there. I mean, I'm a fan of coming into tough conversations with a notepad.
Yeah.
I love a good notepad. I'd be like, I have my points in front of me. I do it even to my husband. I'd be like, here's 4 things that you did today that I did not enjoy. He knows when he sees the notepad, he'd be like, Lord, what happened now? But I think for me, you know, I'm Nigerian. Culturally, we are a very bravado people. We loud, we have 400 people wedding. Like, and again, I'm learning extra boundaries because of stuff like that. Like those moments that taught me like, oh, I have to double down on who I am. Because you'll hear a lot of people talk about like, oh, yeah, no, my parents taking, it's their wedding. I'm like, huh. People who've had whole celebrations, birthdays, they knew 4 people there. Meanwhile, their families knew the whole thing. So like, having a conversation about healthy family dynamics is revolutionary. I think especially for Black people.
I love that you highlighted that cultural part because, again, I think it's one of those exclusions. Well, I am this, and my family is that, and I don't want this, but this is how my family is. Well, it sounds like you're not that way, no matter what the culture is. And you're saying, I don't want, a wedding of...
I did 250, but not, not 400 or 500,
whatever it is, whatever that experience is, whether it's, I want, because in some cultures, you don't leave the home until you're married. Maybe you're the person who wants to move out when you're 26 and unmarried. Maybe you're the person who wants to elope instead of having a big wedding. And it can be a part of your family's culture, but guess what? You are your own family and you develop your culture. You pick the stuff that you want to embrace in your culture.
Say that again. Say that last piece again. I need people to hear it.
You are your family and you develop your own culture.
It means traditions. It means rules. It means values. It means if you don't want to go over there for Christmas, you ain't got to. Okay? It means if you're a vegan, you don't have to eat the stuff that everybody else is eating, even though they're like, oh, you funny acting? People will throw a funny act to you in a hot second. So that is a really, really, really important piece in all of this, is that you are your own culture. So we are going to open it up for questions now. Raise your hand. We have 2 microphones going around.
I have a comment on the culture thing.
Yes, ma'am. Keep going. Watch. No,
For
go ahead.
any parents, any teachers, everybody in here knows a little person.
Yeah.
It's really important to protect their cultural integrity too. When you see a kid with a preference and they're being shamed to eat something, to do something, adults have to really protect their culture.
Yeah.
So, whether you're a parent, a teacher, a friend, when I go out, you need help, baby? Wherever I am, if we have that power to hear a child's voice and stop everybody else from saying, well, this is what you need to do, and that is what you need to do, allowing them to have their own culture, we will be raising a system of people who, maybe they'll need to read the book, but they could skip that part.
This is true. This is true. And I think the adults that grow up minimizing self-betrayal are the ones who are allowed to have their own culture. And I will say, like, my mom definitely let me have my mini culture. This was a culture in my own self. So that's a revolution. So let's get some questions.
So first, let's give a big round of applause.